much chance to kind of meet together afterwards. I'm sure you all discussed different moments, but if there's a sort of feedback mechanism we can develop right now, it'd be very good. So the show was from Flemish drawing from Bruegel to Rubens, and Rubens dominated the show numerically and probably in terms of quality. Bruegel's was not very many drawings which exist in Bruegel. I mean, it seems everyone was very positive about the trip. And why I came out with a statement where I said that 10 years ago we wouldn't have had many takers for this trip. Is that the case, that there's a sort of newfound passion for drawing? Drawing's always been quite marginal. I mean, there's one drawing in the whole of the National Gallery, which is a Leonardo in a darkened room, but one drawing. Mainly the drawings are kept in the British Museum or V&A, but Ashmolean has always had a good collection of drawings, but they're not mainstream. Drawings aren't shown at a mainstream level at the British Museum. The National Gallery very rarely have drawing shows.
I guess they're mostly considered as means to an end if they're studies for paintings or sculptures or something, so they don't often get exhibited in their own right. I guess some of the Dürer etchings would be, an alternative example where that's not the case, but otherwise, yeah, I think it's maybe something in the last several years that maybe just the winds have changed and maybe they'll change again and change back.
Mm. I mean, drawing has also been marginalised in arts. I mean, there used to be much more of a facility for life drawing
Well,
and
well, you go to the Royal Academy to their school, and you still see all the plaster casts around. Which in the old days they used to sit around and draw the plaster casts for the first year or so.
yeah, they used to have drawing room in the Slade. They had plastic casts, and they put them all in the corridors. They were expelled, as it were.
But I think we also touched on the discussion before we went to the Ashmolean too, was that this desire to return to the sort of the original, to the artist's hand, to the mark, to the place where that first touch of the concept arrives, and I thought that came through for me very strongly, was this idea that this is where it originates from. So they were in part showing the original drawing and then translated into the woodcut or the lino cut or the tapestry or whatever. But the essence of what it was that Rubens was conveying was so much more powerful than the drawing. So perhaps it's also a desire to return to that moment of inspiration, to the hand of the artist rather than the hand of the copiers or the endless sort of variations we have as it progresses through the process of dissemination.
I also suspect it's a reaction to technology and to like high-level installations, very expensive technological application of light and sound and whatever.
Where we're losing the fingerprint of the creator, perhaps.
Yeah, that's right. I have to say that I thought Rubens really, his work really shone out. I mean, it was a bit unfair on the others, but it was just something, he just could portray emotion and energy in a really interesting way. I like the way he was using these kind of double limbs to express movement. So there was one drawing where it was an anatomy drawing of a man's, a bit like this one, sort of leg, and then there was another leg and another leg. I just thought I liked the way he was thinking about movement. And it sort of made me think about Francis Bacon actually a little bit. That was incredible. There's, yeah.
And Rubens turned himself a bit into a factory. So you go to the drawings, you know that there is hand, whereas his paintings are often multiple hands.
That's interesting, yeah.
He would often just finish a painting with a few touches. The rest of it's studio of Rubens.
But drawing was more like him.
Just the drawings were his.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see that absolute confident of line when he's putting down, I don't know, just the nose, or just that it's like a one line and he's just nailed it the first time and it's done.
Yeah.
Really sensitive and beautiful quality.
I'd like to make a comment on the formalist approach on the work, say, drawing, going back to what Lester was saying, and the preliminary for the painting, etc. In a way, because my work is very much on the lines and also a bit of abstract, I was looking at the drawing from abstract lines perspective, like Julie Merteu's very earlier work, where she has a lot of lines going all over the place, that sort of thing. I think that could be called as a drawing. So one thing about drawing, when it comes to difference between drawing and painting, is that expression based on very much on the lines rather than forms or colors. And I think that's something that's has to go with the definition of drawing, because it's very much line based. Yes.
I've dropped the Negri text in. Should we look at it today? And Leslie, you're doing a presentation, aren't you? You want to do a presentation first, and we do the Negri text second, or?
Don't mind, or do the Negri text and then just leave a little bit of time at the end, whichever, don't mind. Maybe do the Negri first, while everybody's got energy, because then they can just sit back and relax while I do my presentation.
I'll put it online, I'll put it on.
Can I just ask Jonathan? I mean, I missed the sessions on drawing, but what constitutes a drawing? Is it medium specific, or is it that it's a study and it's not a finished thing, or can a drawing be something which uses paint?
Well, there's ambiguity now between works on paper, which often are paintings as much as drawings. I mean, you get in particularly artists like Giacometti, where they're both drawings and paintings at the same time. You wouldn't necessarily differentiate between them being one or the other. And you get artists like Richard Serra having a drawing practice which is complementary to the sculpture, but not dependent upon the sculpture. And you get a great many, I mean, I don't know the whole history of modern. I mean, Picasso is a great. I mean, his drawings for Les Demoiselles are spectacular. Also, Sora's drawings are a world on their own. So, if you took the best drawing practices across the centuries, you'd really have a fantastic sense of practice which is autonomous from the other arts. I mean, people have been going to the Arbok show and been amazed by that. Drawings from the 60s and 70s. So it's start from the immeasurable. We'd like to start reading.
Jonathan, could you make it slightly larger?
How do you do that?
I don't know. Press on the plus button, plus on the plus at the top. The white band at the top is a little plus in a circle. You just press on that. Keep going to the plus. Keep going, other way. Keep going. No, go to the left. That's it. That's it.
I'm back. So it's start from the immeasurable. Vanda, you read.
Okay. That Kairos releases an arrow and that its trajectory is given irreversibly. That is to say that time is traced by the tip of the arrow, everyone seems to admit. But transcendental philosophy denies that the common same also follows the arrow of time, while on the contrary, this is precisely what we lay claim to. But if time as ontological power is an arrow, how is the common name? Is that? Oh, sorry, where do I go now?
How is common?
Yeah. How is the common name articulated with it? What does it mean to say that the act of naming? No, surely that's not the right way.
The act of naming corresponds to the same name.
Okay, yeah, sorry, I'll start again then. What does it mean to say that the act of naming corresponds to the thing named in accordance with the direction of the arrow of time and in relation to its irreversibility? The preceding argumentation in positing the common name as a product of Kairos insisted on the instant that made of the common name the act of a specific production of being. However, one cannot forget, and we have frequently underlined it, that in the production of an always new reality, there reverberates a sort of restlessness in the power of temporality. Even when the common name appears as a survey and a search, as we have seen in the analysis of common becoming in knowledge, when is it the product of the imagination? The restless vacillation of its production continues to make itself felt. Restlessness cannot be placated. The restless state that the creation of the common name displays through Kairos is still more evident if we look at this production from the psychological standpoint. Here, restlessness presents itself as the impossibility of discerning the instants of consciousness one from the other. It follows from this that the temporality, broken and rendered creative by Kairos, is in accordance with the arrow of time, appears instead to present itself as the duration between a past and a future. The common name, even as it achieves its reality in Kairos, is brought back to testify to a sort of continuous fabric of the before and after, and not to the creativity of Kairos time and of its irreversible power. But if the common name was not shown to be the tip of the same arrow of time, then, with its power left intact, we were to consider the instant of Kairos in a kind of continuity with the before and the after, and made of it the restless bridge of duration. Then there would be no possibility of determining the singularity of the common name, and together with the common name, time also would be conceived of as flux and not as power. That is to say, it would be reconstituted as destiny outside the arrow of power. But this definition is refuted by the experience of Kairos. On the other hand, sorry, go ahead.
One more.
Okay. On the other hand, if, as occurs in classical thought, the instant is removed from the definition of time and considered as an element definable only by the ephemeral intuition of a vacillation of becoming between being and nothingness, all experience determined by the adequation of the act of naming and the thing named will be rendered inadequate and inconclusive.
Thank you. So, 5 fundamental statements in this text. What are they? What is kairos as opposed to telos?
Rupture
Rupture is one.
and a multiplicity.
So its manifestation is potentially multiplicity.
Well, it's duration as opposed to instant.
Yeah.
And it's the manifestation of restlessness. So time is restlessness.
And then there was this thing about power. What was that?
Power as opposed to destiny. So I think we're talking about.
Yeah.
So it's related to
It's kind
imagination.
of not ill-determined. It creates and it invents, maybe.
So it's related to imagination and the time to come. And the imagination is a void of the time to come.
Maybe intuition or something as opposed to destiny.
So it's far from being fixed and predictable.
Again, I think you might say it relates to becoming as opposed to being.
So that's one of the roots in Spinoza, and then in turn Deleuze, is that this idea of becoming over being. What does that oppose to? What's that opposed to philosophically?
The idea of fixed essence.
So it's anti-Platonic, isn't it?
Absolutely.
It's also anti-Heideggerian in another direction. Another theory of being and time. You could say becoming and restlessness and imagination. So imagination gives the possibility of a rupture in time, a change of time, a time of the yet to come, which is not written, not named.
There's also this. So he's talking about the continuity of time and tracing it back to the singularity, and that it exists. Otherwise, it would be just a series of random destinies, and there wouldn't be time would not have any power. I guess cause and effect would disappear. So I was kind of thinking that that kind of idea. How do I say that? That I mean, that's. I guess that's to do with cause and effect. Maybe that's the power of time. Effectively, it relates to cause and effect. Don't know. It's a bit confusing because I think if I were to take the Deleuzean point of view, he would also refer to the ability to have some destiny. That all is not determined. There's a power. So there's kind of what we call something like quasi-cause. That's not in everything. It's not determined. In other words, there's some inventiveness, which means you can't predict what's going to happen. But here he's talking about this continuity, so I'm a little bit confused. Well, I'm not confused. I don't know. It's not in line with Deleuze quite.
What happens to becoming at the point of the act of naming? Because it exists before.
Yeah, but no, it's never the same. It's always changing. So every event becomes part of the name of the thing, right? So it's always evolving. It's never being. It's always becoming. Never being. It's always becoming.
So that's the vacillation.
And that's essentially time, right? Time determined. because of time and the restlessness of time, there's no fixed essences at all. It always, so Deleuze's approach, which this is very close to, it doesn't. There's no essential idea of the thing. It continuously generates its own becoming from internally. So there's nothing external to it. There's nothing given, pre-given. It generally is better. You could say it's genetic. In that sense, does its own genesis. There's no essence. It continually creates itself. Not from within, actually from without, but coming out.
Let's continue. Sharon.
Shall I read from the top of the page, or?
If you from 1:6, I think.
1:6, okay. If we wish to give the common name the direction of the arrow of time and place it in relation to its irreversibility without losing its singularity, it is necessary then that the common name is grasped as an act or praxis of temporality. Only in this way will ontology escape the restlessness that traverses it, and will acknowledge escape from the perception of the ambiguity that makes it vacillate. Seen from the perspective of the arrow of time, that is to say, of its consistency, Kairos is the only real vero, point of ontological irreversibility. It is so because Kairos is the force that advances. Were we to try and think the reversibility of the arrow of time, we would have to pass by way of the Kairos in order to then go back. But this cannot be done. We can thus see the falsity of Zeno's argument, because his argument demands the co-presence of the force Kairos that advances, and of the sophistic reasoning that on the other hand moves backwards, and in doing so divides Kairos. But equally we can grasp the aspect of truth of the Elaic argument, which consists in the destruction of the transcendental idea of the temps duré, inasmuch as it affirms that only the instant is ontologically real. Thus in Kairos, the name and the thing named are presented as one and the same reality, which are both expressed by the force of temporality on the edge of time. The expression of Kairos as an ontological force, we find ourselves here in the parallelism of Spinoza, where being presents the thing and the idea in the form of a mould that desire, conatus, produces together. The common name is therefore a mode of affirmation of being. That is to say, the common name is a force of being, something that constructs new being. For example, if we pass from the adequation of the name and the thing to the imaginative expression of the common name, we witness a truly constitutive operation that situates its creative power on the edge of being. In other words, at the tip of the irreversible arrow of time. We call this process, that is the expression of Kairos, ontological praxis of truth. To say praxis is to say force that constructs or transforms the thing into the name and the name into the thing. In Marx, one finds the formula, the praxis of truth. It consists in fixing the truth to that which praxis constructs, setting out from the determined, the tendential, expression of a resistance. The true, vero, will appear as the affirmation of being that rises up in revolt from within the struggle. Already before Marx, Machiavelli had considered the praxis of truth as the power to make the virtue, virtus, constitutive of the political emerge from the temporal grasping moment. It is within this double perspective that we define the praxis of truth as the development of the force of Kairos.
A bit more.
Okay. The most obvious thing when speaking of time is to divide it into past, present, and future. But as soon as we begin to look at time from the point of view of the temporality of Kairos, past and future are anything but obvious, because the only certain ontological consistency is at the tip of the arrow of time, when it buries itself between name and thing, as though they were one and the same. The consistency of that which comes before and that which comes after must be carefully analysed before including the names of past and future in our lexicon. perhaps we will discover we have something different before us from what is commonly intended by these terms.
Oh, stop there. How's it written? What's the feature? It's style. What's the style of writing? Why is he?
Paragraphs where he's making a consistent point within each paragraph, maybe.
Why is he?
Trying to sort of consistently make something in each paragraph and then moving on to the next aspect of it.
How is he?
Is he smoke?
Is it aphorism?
Hmm?
Is it aphoristic?
It's aphoristic, isn't it?
Yeah.
Who's it based on? What's the references to this approach to writing?
Spinoza?
Spinoza.
Hegel?
Not Hegel, no.
Inner romantics.
There's a reference to Romanticism, yeah. They wrote in aphoristics. Also a reference to, which comes via Wittgenstein into his reference to Spinoza. So it's, yeah, also Adorno. So a very strong Germanic tradition. Alex, you're doing a study of Wittgenstein. Any echoes there?
It's interesting because when I was listening to it being read, the style seemed to me to be very, very different. I, to be honest, struggled in a sort of logical sense to grasp much of what I've just heard. In the way that certain words kind of seem to emerge with slightly more sort of intensity, whether that's sort of restlessness or even sort of just echoes of kind of references to pre-Socratic sort of philosophy. It came across to me as a sort of obscure poetics, and I know that that's how Wittgenstein is often talked about, but the aphorism seemed to me to be longer and more circuitous, and it was only when you asked about the style and I sort of zoomed in and looked that I saw the enumeration and the effort that was going into curating this argument. So the honest truth is that I wouldn't have recognised that. Maybe I would have recognised some of the Spinozan idea, but beyond that, I wouldn't have been able to perceive the Wittgenstein reference. But you know, you've clearly made a case for it, so you know, I'll think about that more.
It's a very particular case. It's not a very formulated case. It's more indirect. But he would have known. He'd have been very familiar with Tractatus.
And I was thinking about it a lot in relation to Wittgenstein and the Tractatus, what Wittgenstein says about time. And in that text, I mean, which is so dense and compressed anyway, he sort of, in his view, deals with time probably in about 400 words. In a way does, yeah, I mean, there's definitely a kind of a connection in that Wittgenstein talks about time not as a thing in itself, but as a measurement of movement through space. And so there's a sort of, I was thinking about that in relation to the notion in this text of time as restlessness, a sort of a requirement for continual kinesis. But I mean, it is a difficult text. This is the first time I've been sort of exposed to it, and it's challenging. It's also very interesting to think about it being written in prison. I think this is what you said when you were introducing it. And Wittgenstein was writing his Tractatus in a prisoner of war camp, and I was, you know, there's a sort of tradition, I suppose, of philosophers writing in prison, because it's, you know, you don't know whether you're going to come out, but also there's kind of a compression maybe of kind of ideas and wanting to compress some kind of essence of experience before it might be all over. And I was also thinking about your own work that you presented, Jonathan, a few weeks ago with these kind of, I really enjoyed your descriptions of these kind of texts, almost like riddles, that you put up against alongside the works of art to say, for example, the judge said you could paint so many things and then put them in a sack and they had to be destroyed. There's something kind of interesting about, maybe it was just I didn't understand a lot of this text by Negri, but there was a kind of, I sort of recognized maybe the slight insanity of someone who's thinking in their own head for a long period of time without any conversation, which is obviously wonderful, but it's also a kind of certain degree of compromise in one's own ideas. And so there's a kind of solipsistic intensity, which kind of evokes something of the experience of that imprisonment as well, which I found quite moving.
Let's continue. Sharon, just read a bit more and then 2 more sections and then we'll...
Jonathan, can I just say something that I was thinking? I mean, I agree that it's a very dense text and you need time, literally need time to really think about it. But this idea that it's talking about the point and the point of the arrow, something about this, it moves from past to future, but you can't move it backwards, or you can't reverse it. But I was thinking a little bit about gravity and how mass, which leads to gravity, can bend time, and that there is a sense in which gravity itself can pull back time. So, and that's possibly sounds a bit technical, but it's I wasn't convinced by that aphorism, if you like, or that particular paragraph.
I mean,
so I'm just putting that.
If you mention the arrow of time, you're mentioning the context of science, then you immediately evoke the concept of the arrow of time from science, which is linked to entropy and determines the direction of time, irrespective of gravity. Time only ever flows in one direction, even in gravity. The arrow of time, I mean, there is no direction of time in the laws of physics.
Right.
It creeps in through thermodynamics. And the arrow of time is the related to movement and dissipation of things. And that's how that is called the arrow of time in physics.
Or can you have negative time?
Not that I know of.
Okay.
But I mean, there is another dimension, right, in which you can't distinguish the past and the future. It's just something he hasn't referred to, right? I mean, there is another space from which the time emanates, if you like. I don't know, that's what's his name? Bergson would call the virtual, the intuition.
Right, yes.
That would connect past and future.
And he says that as soon as we begin to look at time from the point of view of the temporality of Kairos, past and future are anything but obvious.
Yeah, there I thought he was talking about the virtual.
Yeah.
I also like to add that also the time that this text was written, and Fanda, your point about time and
Gravity.
gravity, etc. I mean, a lot of things that physics has developed so much. I was reading about Higgs, recent death of his Higgs boson, and how long it took to Sun to come to the experiment of sort of verify what he was talking about. All these things are actually quite modern. And I think at the time that this text was done, of course, a lot of thinking, philosophies and theories and physics and etc. I just have to think about time of that text and theory was developed as well.
When was the text written? When is it?
Just
Because I don't think much has changed, right? I mean, gravity hasn't changed since then. Nothing substantial has changed. I mean, we might have guessed various theories, but they're all completely unproven. Nothing much has changed. Gravity was around, thermodynamics has been around for hundreds of years. I don't think we've really made much progress. Speaking as a physicist, I'm not sure about that. We'd like to answer that question, but we haven't got anywhere.
Anyway, let's continue.
Where were we up to? Was it 4.2?
3.2.
3.2.
I think 3.2.
Okay. Okay, so my apologies for not using the notations as well. 3.2, outside of the illumination of Kairos and of the force that, by continuously opening up time, constructs new being, the past appears to be that which is finished, finito, here, while the future appears to be that which, from here onwards, is unfinished, infinito. But this first definition of past and future is entirely without consistency. It makes no sense to call that enormous, irreversible mass of being that precedes us finished, finito, or to call unfinished, infinito, what is not yet. This first definition and this first error persists thanks to a kind of obtuse tendency to consider past and future, not in accordance with the arrow of time, but on a homogeneous plane. There is a failure to see that, by doing so, time loses its character of irreversibility and Kairos its creative force. From this erroneous perspective, time is reduced to a single extension without gaps that is traversable in every direction, which contradicts the common experience of the irreversibility of the arrow of time. Further, from the perspective we are criticizing, Kairos no longer exists as such, because in this time made of extension, no creative event can be discovered. 3.3. In the conception of time as res extensa, all rests on the power of a transcendent being who takes away all ontological consistency from time, and so any consistency from past and future. One would do well to remember the homicidal God that the mystic Gelunix theorized against Spinozism. God understood as absolute despot, within those arms there rests the illusion of a well-ordered world, where everything, even horror, is pacifically necessary, and where the past and the future are entirely inscrutable within the constitutive act of the absolute. 3.4. From the point of view of Kairos, what is the being that has already been and the being that is not yet come? Which and what are the names that we give to that which in the arrow of time is before Kairos and that which is not yet Kairos? 4.1. Many see in the name of the future the identical repetition of what has already happened. From this point of view, the future means that which persists. Even when others see the future as progression that modifies the conditions of arrival in comparison to those of departure, it is still the case, with greater or lesser variations, that the future will be a positive or negative, but continuous reproduction of itself. On the other hand, all the forms in which predictions of the future are attempted are in some manner statistical, which is to say that they are the study of the repetitions and of the constants to which, or to whose measure any exception is reduced. The same can be said for all forms of future-orientated normative prescriptions. Those of the form, you must therefore, you have to, there are always the result of the hypostasis of the principles derived from what has already happened. For the most part, therefore, the future is future duration. The restlessness of time is subjected to the continuity of space.
One more.
4.2. Insofar as it is the future duration, the future is the vision that lies at the base of technologies, whether those of the hard science or the human or normative sciences. In this case also, the temporal or posteriori is reduced to the norms of the priori spatial calculus. The progress of technologies is translated into the ever-increasing presumption of the prefiguration of the future. But that is not the way things are, and indeed the foreseeing of that which will be is only valid when it springs from the praxis or kairos and constitutes itself, as we shall see, in the temporality of its tool.
Just one more, and then 4.3, and we'll finish there.
4.3. Desire also invests the future, we call it utopia, but it invests the to come in an ambiguous manner. In fact, on the one hand, it proposes the spatial homology of the past, and on the other hand, it overtakes it in the imaginative expression of desire. In general, however, utopia cannot present itself as the name of the to come because, even when it does not repeat the continuity of the spatial figure, desire presents itself here as spatial distance, non-topos, but still in place,
Okay, that's good. Thoughts?
I mean, he starts out somewhere in 4.2, he's discussing this idea that technology thinks it can predict the future, or that science believes the future is predicted or given, and he denies that that's true. And it should be not true because of the generative element inside of it. So in effect, the future, in effect here, what is given is not subject to something essential, continuously generative. So I guess there's somehow here a reference to Kant, and in this presuppositions, and I think he's disputing that imagination needs concepts to Kant would be using concept, that imagination relies on concepts which would be somehow fixing the future, but he's denying that.
Imagination comes before the concept.
Yeah, but it still gets it's still reduced. It depends, right? If you're post-Kantian, you're gonna say that he still reduced it down to the concept, everything in the end. The concept determined everything. Kant would disagree, but all the post-Kantians would disagree with Kant, and I think that's what's going on here. Otherwise, it wouldn't be like this. So this imagination is not being tamed by the concept. Yeah. But it continues to be invented.
I mean, he's arguing for an open future, isn't he?
Yeah. There's a work I made for the exhibition that I have on at the moment, and it has the words "the future is not given," which is a quote from a chemical physicist who disputes that physicists, or sorry, not physicists, that scientists can predict that the future, the action of time is determines the future in physics or in science. And I think that's quite influential to people like Deleuze. And I believe that's exactly the same concept that's going on here.
And this, like I was saying before, this is really where Bifo is picking up on his in his book, No, The End of the Future.
Yeah, there'd be a very close relationship. They'll know this text off by heart.
In terms of science, what is influencing a lot of this, I think, at that time is the discovery of emergent behaviour and chaotic behaviour, and the laws of physics now are not capable of predicting. There is uncertainty in the future. So Deleuze, for example, would pick up on that. But I think it's very influential. Those discoveries were happening in the mid-60s, and that person I quoted won the Nobel Prize for one of those discoveries at that time.
He also makes the connection between temporality and space, and that I'm assuming he's saying that you can't have one without the other.
Yeah, I was interested in that. I mean, obviously, that's why I thought there was a Kant connection here, because it's Kant who talks about the relationship between time and space at first instance. And Kant would argue that space exists within time. So would Deleuze and a number of post-Kantian. And I'm not sure if he's saying that here or not. I was a bit confused. Is he saying that? What is non-topos, but still place me? I wasn't 100% sure I understood.
We're just reading the. Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say in the Bifo text I was reading, he talks about when he's introducing the idea of the end of the future, he talks about the fractalization of time. I think in reference to the virtual, and so it seems to me a really logical way of starting to think about that.
Let's just read another 10 minutes and then we'll do a presentation. Who'd like to read? 4.4. Who's got a good reading voice?
I think they say it's the women that have the better reading voices. That's why all the sat navs and emergency controls on airplanes are all in female voices.
Is that a fact now?
Well, I don't know if it's a fact, but that's what I've read.
I think that's to say you can ignore the female voice, Lester. I don't think that's...
No, hardly. You if you're piloting an aircraft and it's an emergency, you better listen to it if you know what's good for you. It's kind of like the way things work at home.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, we had Sherin and Ben, that's I was going to volunteer Lester.
Well, I'm happy to read, but I have a male voice. Okay, 4.4. In all and each of these cases, what is missing is the apperception of the creative moment that establishes that which is yet to arrive. In the perspective we are criticizing, and which seems to us to be the most widely held, future is a mystified, erroneous name. On the contrary, we give the name of to come to the horizon of experimentation of the adequation of the name and the thing, and to the imaginative perspective that, in realizing itself, presents itself as new being. The passage to the to come is always a difference, a creative leap. Repetition, and with it duration, are destructured by the current experience of the to come, real in this way comprehended in a new matter in the making of Kairos. 4.5. We will define the time that is coming as the to come, and the to come as ontological constitution in action, and the common name to come we will define as the expression of the force of invention, that is to say, as the vis of Kairos. 4.6. The everyday sense of life confirms the definition of that which is coming as to come rather than as future. It is indeed in the struggle for the free appropriation of the present that life opens itself to the to come, and desire perceives, against the empty and homogeneous time in which all is equal, including and in particular the future, the creative power of praxis. If life is not on this active experience of the to come, it cannot be called life. The same goes for technologies and sciences. It is not a case of little spatial machines made to dominate the future. On the contrary, they are placed in being and innovated in their efficacy by the activity of the common name as praxis, by the vis of kairos. Sciences and technologies are the tools of kairos. They are born and develop within life and produce the to come on the edge of time, but we will discuss all this in later lessons.
Let's do one more.
Okay, 5.1. In the same way, when I consider the name past, I also usually find myself before the erroneous idea of a time past as extension, and that is in the image of a dead, finite time distended in duration. I therefore understand why past is, for the majority of people, only the name of destruction and death. When understood as such, the past is, in effect, the enemy of kairos time. From the moment Aristotle said, time is in itself above all cause of corruption, because it is the number of movement, and movement puts the existent outside of itself, the philosophers have been able to lead us into error concerning that which has been, because in such a way time would be considered simpliciter, as a duration that comes to an end through corruption, as a number that expels existence from being. On the contrary, I cannot conceive of time other than as kairos, so never as corruption and death. In other words, the past is normally conceived of as the accumulation of destruction of physical events. But to think that temporality could have destruction in its name is meaningless, because the temporality that we experience and live through is only that of kairos and of the creative act that constitutes it, and only that. In being, all is created and nothing is destroyed within the immediacy of the present.
One more, and then we'll wrap it up.
Okay. 5.2. The past of man constitutes his history. When I consider the name past in this acceptation, I normally find myself before the erroneous idea of a continuous genesis of the present, extended along and ordered or not. It changes nothing. Sedimentation of concluded human events. But to consider what has occurred before us as sedimentation of time, traversed without recuperating, moment by moment, point by point, the vitality which created it, and the monads of kairos that are expressed in it, goes against our experience of temporality, which is precisely that of it as a creative force.
Stop there. So could there be one or two summaries? You can go and read the rest of the text later. What are the 10 points of the text we've read so far?
Time is creative. Time is becoming. Time is not, being is not fixed.
I think he's saying time goes forward and backward.
Well, I think this is the reference to repetition, right? And this would be what Deleuze calls it, difference and repetition. Everything repeats, but it never repeats the same, always the different. And the reason it's different is because of time. Nothing is ever the same because of time, but everything repeats itself over and over again. And an example would be, for example, some event that happened, and actually everything is here all these connections with singularities are events, which are these creative acts. The event repeats itself, and it doesn't. It's not like the event disappears. The event repeats from singularity to singularity in series. And the repeating of the event is a new event, but it doesn't disappear the past. So this connection doesn't disappear. But it's recreated in another, with a new dimension to it.
Isn't the idea of, isn't the mention of monads significant in him kind of describing a kind of multiple pointed kind of series of forces which couldn't be described as the traditional movement of time?
Yeah, also the reference to apperception. I see that as all a reference back to Leibniz, right? And Leibniz would control everything in the end is controlled within by and not is contained, but in that isn't. So I guess Deleuze would say the monad became nomadic. The distribution is not self-contained. The monads, which was kind of the last attempt by philosophy to come up with a self-consistent model of God and logic and blah blah blah. And the perception of things was gained through these tiny apperceptions of the space around oneself. And Deleuze would say that, and I think others, right, would argue that didn't work. Kant as well, and that there's this interaction between the monads; they're not separate from each other, and that they become nomadic in that sense. And that kind of is creative act you can't contain, not unless there's a God who does that, basically. Spinoza is about the death of God. So that's basically it's the death of that kind of what do you say order becomes creative and can't hold it together.
Is he? I'm just a little bit confused as well. Is he saying that, for instance, a utopia is an impossibility for it to be realized because any figuration of the future in the act of it being figured is a creative force which diverts it away from that specific direction which it's indicating?
I'm not sure I followed his argument exactly. I kind of, he was talking about desire as opposed to utopia, I think. And I think that may be that.
It's not a Hegelian desire either. It's a Deleuzian idea of.
Yeah, that's what I mean. This force, this desire is force. Actually, it's the force. I think that's also a Spinozian force. And if it were a utopia, I think it would, as if there's some essential good, a common good. I don't think there's no common here in that sense. So I think utopia doesn't seem to make sense to me.
But also, utopia is a horizon that you could never reach in its, definition, I guess, I suppose. So it's not something that could be realized other than in figuration.
I mean, it seems to me utopia is external. It would suggest some goal that everything's heading towards. But desire would be against that.
It also suggests agency of some kind.
Yeah, which I think is in disputing. And I think that's quite Spinozian, right? I mean, Spinoza is a theory of God, but it's a God that is effectively doesn't exist beyond the laws of nature or is nature itself. at a creative nature, and everything is one within that, with all its complexity and size. So, I mean, in that sense, it's not controllable. It has its own internal power.
There's a little bit of shelling there. Shall we leave this now, and unless there's other points, and go on to Lester's presentation?